As you're going through your meetings and we're getting ready for taxes, the most important thing you talk about during your entire meeting is your investment commentary. That's right. All 55 plus minutes of your meeting needs to be on investment commentary.
This is the perfect RIA, in case you didn't know. Bringing you all the strategies to help your business grow. Are you happy? Are you satisfied? Are you hanging on the edge of your seat? Sit back and listen in while you feel the beat, yeah. Another myth bites the dust.
Today's podcast is brought to you by TPR Live. That's right, the Perfect RA. Micah and myself will be joining you live and in person in Phoenix, Arizona on September 25th, where we will be helping you with all things related to fees. How much to charge your clients, how to adjust your fees, how to explain fees to your prospects, and of course, the extreme accountability around how to make that actually happen. So go to theperfectria.com/live to get signed up and get all those important details. Alrighty, back to the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Perfect RIA Podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Jarvis, and with me, as usual, the man, the myth, the legend, coming to you live from Wasilla, Alaska, Micah Shalansky. Micah, how are you, my friend?
Jarvis, it's another day in paradise. How could I possibly complain? Tax day is going to wrap up here pretty quick, and moving on to some great trips. We have a lot of time out of the office, which is always fun and terrifying, but we're going to go hike the Camino as a family, and so that'll be a ton of fun.
Yeah. I didn't share with you before we hit record. I was recently contacted by a friend that I know who's a journalist at Investment News, and she says, hey, you and Micah, is your shtick just to provoke people, or is it all swagger? I'll show you the message. I was done a joke.
Is it swagger, or are you just jerks?
You're just jerks. And I laughed at that just like you did. My message to her, really to our audience, definitely we have this contrarian streak, right? We really can't resist. And most of you can't resist kind of poking the bear. But there's a lot of questions that need to be asked. And could we ask them in a gentler way? Probably. And today's podcast is about this, but there are questions that need to be asked that no one is asking. And you got to ask them hard enough that people stop to think.
You know, Jarvis, in order to think critically, you must risk being willing to offend people.
Yes.
Right? And now I didn't make this up. This is from JBP, Jordan B. Peterson, right? I mean, one of his comments, which I thoroughly agree with. And it's not to the intent to insult someone's integrity and character. And this is where the sissy la-la start freaking out. And it's because I don't like your idea. I think you're a horrible person. Well, two things can be true at once, but that's not exactly the case in this time. This is more about, no, we need to have critical thinking and good pushback in order to advance our understanding of financial planning and to advance delivering value to clients. And if you're not willing to have those conversations, you are not willing to provide more value to your client. It's that simple.
Yeah, it really is. Mike, you and I both recently read the Elon Musk biography, and one of the things that the Elon talks about...
It's a quick read, by the way. Just super quick read.
Quick read. Even on 10X, quick read. He talks about whenever he's looking at rules for SpaceX, mostly government rules for SpaceX, he says, who wrote this rule and why? And they said, well, the department, no. I want the guy's name who wrote this rule, and I want to get him on the phone, and I want to ask him why this rule is in place, right? So Elon is ruthless about why are we doing things this way? This was specific to like the material. He's like, hey, why don't we use stainless steel? And I was like, you can't use stainless steel for a spaceship. Want to bet? Let's give it a try, right? Same is true for our practices. Everything that we do, especially if it's things that we see everyone else doing, we really need to step back and say, hey, why exactly am I doing this? Am I doing it because it will ultimately deliver massive value to my clients? Or am I doing it because it's what we've always done and it's what everybody does? Therefore, I guess I'll just sit here and pretend like I'm interested.
Yeah. And sometimes you're going to push into this a little bit and you're going to find out what you're doing is really delivering value and it's the best approach and it's going to be fantastic.
Yes.
And sometimes you're going to push into it and you're going to be like, wow, what I've been doing for the last 20 years that I rely upon, that I focus on, that is 90% of my meeting is not actually delivering value. And it's going to be a shell shock moment. And you are not alone. Jarvis, you didn't start off knowing all of these things. I definitely did not. So it was a lot of learning experiences as we were going through this to get to the place. So the intent with this is to push the envelope in financial planning to delivering value to clients. How are you running your practice? What are the things that are critical to clients, et cetera? We don't get into super technical things, right? Most advisors have those things figured out, but where they're missing is the communication piece, the effectiveness piece, and driving their practice.
Yeah, Micah, that can really even be a filter, right? Whatever I'm doing, is this going to help me communicate more effectively with clients? And if not, or if at least it's not more than like 1 degree removed from being able to more effectively communicate with clients, I'm probably doing the wrong thing. And here's a real example, and this is what kind of driving this podcast. Micah, you and I have the opportunity to speak at a lot of industry events, a lot of conferences, a lot of training things.
Yeah.
And there's often other people on the agenda. Now, we try to get them off the agenda so it's just us. And we do have those events, right? All of our Invictus trainings, it's just the Matt and Micah show. We love it. It's our favorite. But when we speak at other conferences, right, often we keynote, but there are other speakers there, right? Micah, you know this is true. Don't act like it's not.
It's not. It's just funny. It's just going back to that investment news comment, right? Is it just swagger? Well, apparently that comment is. It's just ego, but moving on.
But there's always an economic update. And it's usually somebody with a lot of letters after their name, and they're from a big company that everyone recognizes, and they spend 20, 30 minutes, an hour going through all of these slides, somehow trying to predict the future. Like at the end of the day, if we boil it down, they're trying to predict the future. So meanwhile, and this may be my shtick, like I got like the horoscope page out from the newspaper. I'm like, hey, I'm a Leo. What do you think my investment outlook should be as a Leo, right? But why are we doing this? Like, why are we sitting here talking about what the feds might do next? Why? Like, how is that improving the client experience?
You know, Travis, I think it's the aspect of no one wants to be a ship without a rudder.
Yeah.
And so I really think it's the aspect that we're grasping at some certainty in an uncertain world. And we're trying to say, what's something I can lock into? And then money's emotional, right? Is with us, with clients, right? It definitely is. And so money's emotional. And so we're saying, a client has entrusted us with their entire life savings. We feel a need to get more information. We feel a need to analyze this even more and to say, hey, how do I peel this back even more where I'm making the best decision for a client? And that comes from a really, really good place.
Yeah.
But just because that question comes from a good place doesn't mean it's leading you to the correct answer. And that's where we need to stop and say, hey, what's helping? Now, there are times that I do like to geek out in way too much technical stuff, right? I'm a technical stock guy. I like the charts. I like all this other stuff. I can prove how indexing works really well, but I still like it, right? I do. And so I still like to dive into that. So it's appropriate if I give it its right place and it doesn't dominate everything.
Yeah, for sure it is. Now, and Micah, you mentioned this earlier, these are tough habits to change, right? There's a big dopamine hit that comes from studying the economic updates, right? Like you said, this feeling of certainty, like, hey, we know what's going to come next. When the clients come and say, hey, what is the market going to do next? We can give them some kind of answer. I always like to boil it down to the absurd. One, because I like comedy, but I like to boil it down to the absurd. So when clients, say, hey, listen, what do you think about this economic update? I say, hey, would you like to know who won the lottery yesterday? Would you like to know yesterday's winning lottery numbers? Now, this has to be delivered appropriately because it could really feel facetious, right? And they say, well, I don't really care about yesterday's winning lottery numbers. I said, yeah, but that guy he took $2 and turned it into $200 million. Yeah, but that's yesterday's numbers. So is everything else we're looking at, right? Everything else is trying to guess tomorrow's lottery numbers. Cannot be done, right?
No, I gotta pause right there. You gotta be really careful with that comment, right? With clients. Now, Jarvis has a lot of experience of when to use it, when to not use it. Because if you're like, whoop-de-doo, nobody cares. Jarvis, I'm not picking on you.
No, please. Yeah, because you could really screw this one up.
You could, right? Because the client's coming to you, again, for certainty, for confidence, for holding their nest egg, et cetera. And there's a certain level of expectation, and this again could be why we fall into the trap of playing office in this area. There's a certain level of expectations that we have an idea of what are things going on. So there's definitely a balancing act right here.
A more productive version of that, because you have to be more careful. This one's much easier to deliver. I always like to use an example of, hey, it's a presidential election year. Do you think that the board of Microsoft when they meet this month, do you think they're going to consider shutting down the company if the election goes the wrong way?
Oh, no, they're not. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. Of course not. Do you think your local grocery store is like, hey, listen, let's not order groceries for December just in case this goes the wrong direction, right? So great news in America, and Micah, you have some great lines on this too. Great news. We all get super riled up about the elections, and half of us are happy with the outcome and half of us are angry, and we all go back to work the next day. Therefore, I'm not super worried about it.
All of us?
All of us who work. Those of us who worked before the election go back to work after the election.
So yeah, it's one of the things that I like to bring up to clients, right? Kind of the same thing. This is what I was saying a little bit last year, especially coming into an election year, because they'll ask like, Micah, what do you think is going to happen this next year? I said, well, Mr. and Mrs. Client, you guys are savvy investors, so you know this. So please forgive me for bringing this up. But the entire world is going to miss it. But you already know this is a presidential election year, and it's kind of funny. It's almost like it happens every 4 years on schedule, but the entire world forgets about it. And the entire world is going to go nuts about two potential political candidates, and we're going to have market volatility. And the markets are going to go up and the markets are going to go down. And it's going to be the end of the world. It's going to be the best of times. It's going to go back and forth consistently. And you know what? At the end of the day, we're going to have a peaceful transition of powers. We're going to be moving on to the next cycle. And in 4 years, we're going to talk about the same thing all over again. So my job in this is not to get lost in the storm. My job is to really look at that longer term picture and say, how do I protect you now? Long term, I still think is really, really good. And we can talk about why that is. But long term, I think is good. But the short term, how do we need to make sure you're protected in this volatility we're probably going to come into? Our advisors are really savvy. They're already picking up what I'm doing here. I'm positioning the transition to the buckets conversation, right? Mm-hmm. Why? Because that's what they can use, right? That's a tool they can actually use right now. If I talk about, the markets going up and markets going down and what the Fed's going to do with rates and how things are going to be affected and all of these other things, that's outside of their control. I want to move this into what decisions can they make? Yeah, it's going to be volatile. Great news. That's your 5+ year bucket of money, right? That's money we don't need in the next several years. It's okay if it's volatile. Mr. and Mrs. Client, I know it doesn't feel good. My money's invested in the same thing. It never feels good when it goes down, but this is our long-term plan. The great news is we're still kicking out $8,000 a month. And you just said your cash flow is really good and we can keep sending out that $8,000 a month. And we're not worried about this because of A, B, and C. So again, whatever I'm talking about in market commentary, right? I want to address their concerns because they're real concerns. So I got to address them appropriately. Then I got to boil it back down to them. So take it from macro to a micro to them and then give them something they can control.
Two things I really want to pull from this, make sure the advisors got that are listening, right? One is that you've given it to them. I know you just said this, but it's really critical. Something that they can control. A lot of frustration, almost all frustration and anger in life comes from a sense of helplessness.
Yes.
So when a client comes in and they're concerned and they feel helpless, they feel at the mercy of the markets, which by a large extent we're bringing them back to here's what you can control: buckets, cash flow, et cetera. The other thing I want to draw out, and you went by it quickly, but I want to make sure the advisors got this. You said, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Client, I know that you're savvy investors and you probably already know this. Now, Micah, if you're not watching the video, he's smiling right now because that was not an accidental phrase. And it's also not platitudes. This isn't like are they in fact savvy investors? Yes.
Yes.
The fact that they saved up hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, these are some of the most savvy investors in the entire world.
100%.
Okay, so this is a statistically accurate statement and we're reminding them of that. Mr. and Mrs. Client, you guys are smart investors. You've been through this before. You know how this movie ends. Let's provide a little commentary on this, right? That little bit of compliment, again, it's not a platitude. It's an accurate assessment. So reminding them where they're at, and it's building relationship capital. If they ask a question and I launch into some 400-page economic commentary, what I'm basically saying is, hey, you're a dummy. I'm the expert, and I'm just going to overwhelm you with information so you feel like a bigger dummy and more helpless. That's what those economic updates are doing.
Jarvis, this is off topic, but kind of fits to the same thing. We never do that. We never do that here. So one of the things we do is, kind of an offshoot, just, here's our squirrel, is we do CFOs, right? Virtual CFO work where we come into a business and do a lot of the stuff. And we're working with one with a hospital, and the doctor's super smart and whatnot, but she doesn't get the finance portion of it. She didn't go into medicine to realize finances, right? She went into medicine to practice it, but now she's in this position. So we come in and we're dealing with the attorneys, we're dealing with the accountants, we're going through things that she needs to sit in on most of the meeting to hear what's going on. But they'll get super technical and things. And we'll have to bounce back and forth with some technical things, right? And then I need to kind of step back and translate it. But it's really funny. My sister and I got done with one of the meetings with the doctor, and the attorney and the accountant left. And we went through a lot of stuff. And then my sister looks at the doc and was like, feel a little overwhelmed? She's like, yes, I feel a little overwhelmed. And my sister's like, great. Do you want to go downstairs and we can explain all of these medical terms that we have no idea what you're talking about and you want to blow us out of the water and we're going to be super confused? She's like, yeah, actually, that made me feel really good and smart about myself, right? She's extremely intelligent, as are our clients on the field in which they do. So it's so easy to drop into our natural environment, which is to talk a little bit more technical, and we completely lose the clients. So that aspect about that comment, they're savvy. They are in so many areas. Just because we know a little bit more, oh wait, that's why they hired us, is because we know a little bit more about this, right? But not to make them feel stupid about it, to make them feel empowered to help them achieve their goals.
There is, of course, like everything, there's a spectrum going on here, right? So spending your days reading economic commentary, not value. It's not delivering value to anyone, not to you, not to clients. It's a huge playing office, huge distraction. On the opposite extreme, if you are totally oblivious to what's going on and you cannot have an intelligent discussion, an informed discussion about what's going on, you're like, oh, it's an election year. I forgot about that. That is going to destroy confidence with clients, right? So you need to have enough knowledge so that people are like, hey, actually, you know what you're doing. But the margin of diminishing returns kicks in really quickly. Like if suddenly you're like, hey, let me tell you how many delegates each state has, electoral college, nobody's going to care about that. That's wasted time. But if you're like, oh yeah, this is an election year, who's running? That's too far the way. So Micah, how do we find balance in here? As you're working for yourself, when you're working with the other advisors on your team, how are you helping to balance that spectrum?
So what I need to know, have information on, is the answers to the questions the client is going to ask, right? So if I don't run into something, if it's not something that I do in that, an advisor came to me the other day and he's dealing with a divorce and a stock option plan. And I was like, well, I don't do divorces and I don't do stock options. I was like, so I have enough information to be dangerous. Here's the people that I would say do this and go talk to them. So when it comes to us, what are clients going to ask about? Well, let's talk about the Fed real quick. Do I need to know what's going on with the Fed? Generally speaking, yes, not in detail, right? At a high level, because interest rates affect my clients. A lot of my clients have mortgages, right? So when rates were dropping, I needed to be aware of what current rates are. Or they're talking about their kids buying a house. I need to know what current rates are going on. That's something I need to know. Mortgage rates, I need to know savings rates. Why? Because now savings rates are north of 4 or 5%. And I have some clients that were still at the 0.0%. And I need to be watching out for that. And let's move their 100 grand, their 200 grand of savings into a 5% account. I need to be knowing about long-term rates with this one as well, because I have some clients like, oh my gosh, Micah, because their mindset is a traditional mindset that if I can get a 4% rate for a 1-year CD, I should go get a 20-year CD at 12%, right? I'm like, well, it's a really great idea, but that's not how it works. So I need to know a little bit about the yield curve. I don't need to know when the next Fed meeting is and what they're going to do. So again, what questions are my clients going to ask? That's the information that I need to know.
Yeah, that's spot on. And then I also want to acknowledge it's very difficult to translate just general economic knowledge into actionable advice for clients. And so the way to shortcut that, if you're not listening here with 20 years of experience, right, like Micah and myself, this is where you go to other advisors. Hey, what are you talking to clients about this surge cycle, right? Advisors who you respect, not clowns, not discount advisors, right? An advisor you say, someday I want to have that advisor's practice. That's where when I run into your dad, Floyd, I say, hey, Floyd, what are you talking about clients about? Because I want to know, right here, he's got 40 years of wisdom on this thing. Hey, what are you talking to clients about? Well, Matthew knows, here's the thing I'm talking to clients about. Okay, cool. Now, that may be something that I decide to talk to clients about, or it might just be something I file away in the Gee Whiz file. But I always want to go to people that are more successful than me. What are you talking to clients about? That's valuable, right? Me reading the Wall Street Journal end to end, it's not value there.
So your clients are directing this, right? So if you're following our advice, which is when a client comes in and they ask questions, you write that down. Again, on my side, it's the left-hand side of my homework sheet. I'm writing down what their questions are. Then that's going to be the direction that you need to learn a little bit more at. So if there's an area that you feel soft in, that's a general question you have coming, you need to spend a little bit more time. And this wouldn't be playing office. You need to spend more time knowledgeable about those things. If it's not something you get a lot of questions on, then it's probably something you don't need to spend a lot of time on.
What is a good use of time? Like if I've got time blocked on my calendar, if I have like Monday mornings from 8 to noon blocked out as my professional development time, what can I really be doing during that time to improve my ability to deliver value to clients, especially around this idea of the economy?
Well, I'll give a couple different stages depending on where you're at, right? One of the things is, if we're just looking at the investment side, do you run consistent models or do you have a hodgepodge of every single different thing in your accounts, right? Let's say you're more on the growth side of your career, so more the beginning side of your career, you probably have a big hodgepodge. I would spend time creating how do you streamline those into 5 or 6 models at the most, right? How do you streamline those? Now you're hearing this and you're saying, no, I can't. Everybody's special. Yes, you can. And everybody is still special. So you can do those things, at least 99%. Jarvis, do you think that's an incorrect statement?
No, let me just confess here. We have for the last, 10 plus years run one model. We have one model. It has varying degrees of bond allocation with war chest, bucket one, depending on the client's needs. That's it, one model. And if you don't like that model, it's like Henry Ford. You can have the Model T in any color you want as long as it's black. We just run one model. That's it. End of the day, one model. But yes.
Yeah, and I just want to pull out different allocations.
Different bond allocations different amounts in the cash bucket, right? The war chest.
Yes. Yeah.
Otherwise, same holdings for everybody. No exceptions.
Yep. There you go. Yeah. So it's always going to be one-off scenarios you can think of in your mind. Put those aside, right? That's the big thing I would say. So if you're starting out, if all of your clients are in different models, that's your main focus. How do you streamline this and get it more succinct pattern?
Another one I would say during that time is really, really long-term economic trends, not like months or even years, decades, generations. This is like Random Walk Down Wall Street book. This is Stocks for the Long Run. This is Basic Economics. These are books that will help you understand what is the market doing over hundreds of years, not what does someone think the market's going to do next week.
I was going to share, and the way I use that with clients, and I know you do the same thing, right, is a client will get really caught up with like something that's happening at this moment. Oh my gosh, there's an election, the Fed's doing this, ABC's happening, et cetera. I said, yeah, I can understand this really, scary and these things are happen. Let's take a step back and see how this actually affects you, right? And then I'll bring in some of the historical knowledge about what these trends have been over this period in time. So knowing that is very empowering.
Another one I do, I don't know if I ever confessed this one to anyone, Micah, is we always have the big index charts on the wall, like the history of the market since 1926. Sometimes I'll just take time, this feels silly saying this, I'll just take time to stare at that chart and kind of reflect on it. And I do that with clients as well. They'll ask a question and I've got it on the wall and I'll turn and I'll just look at it. And I'll sit there quietly and just kind of stare at it. And of course, then they'll turn and look at it and I'll just pick some random thing on there like, Mr. and Mrs. Client, do you remember the 9/11 terrorist attacks? It's obviously real somber. Yeah, I do remember that. Yeah. You remember how we all thought that the markets were never going to come back, that the world would never resume normal? And this is not to make light of that horrific terrorist attack. Felt like the world was going to end. And you had a pretty damn good rationale for it as well. And here we are, the market's 5 times higher than it was then, right? Or we can rewind back further. Like, hey, do you remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, depending on their age? Do you remember the savings and loan crisis, right? So just things like, how can I be more introspective about what's going on here versus caught up in these little nuanced details that don't matter?
Yep. And then again, from those conversations, I tie it immediately into buckets.
Yeah.
Right. So what's something they can do? So these long-term trends are just super, super important to stay focused on the long-term horizon and then tie it back to their goals, right? That's another really important part about saying, hey, why are we focused on this long-term? Is because you want ABC. In order to get ABC, we have to do X. And that's how this long-term is going to help us.
The other area where we can spend time that's far more productive than economic commentary is understanding, right? At the end of the day, no matter how cool your strategy is, it's time in the market, not time in the market. And that's an old, tired cliche, right? It's perhaps our most important job as a financial advisor is to keep clients from making really bad financial decisions, either panicking when things get down or getting greedy when things go up. So really, at the end of the day, the best thing I can do on economics is understand how to do behavior management, right? Who are the best communicators? That's where I'm going back and I'm reading like old Stephen Covey stuff where he talks about the circle of things that we're concerned about and the circle of things that we can control. I'm looking at old Zig Ziglar stuff, right? Like, how do we communicate these things effectively? That is going to be far more valuable in a client meeting than what's the yield curve out at year 17.
Well, Jarvis, kind of on that same note, right? This podcast is all about action items. So what are some action items our listeners can kick off this week to help improve their practice?
Mike, I would kick this week off with pull out your calendar, like physically pull it up and look and say, what am I doing this week? Like, what's on my calendar this week? Why am I doing this thing? And how is it helping clients, right? So look and say, boy, I've got this 30 minutes scheduled to read an economic commentary. Cool. Why am I doing that? And how is it going to help clients? And then, of course, the alternative then is, what am I going to do instead?
Jarvis, it's not just theoretical how it's going to help clients. It's pick a client and tell me exactly how it's going to help Bob and Sue, how it's going to help Dave and Sarah, right? How is it going to help those clients, right? And if we don't have an answer, that probably means we don't need to learn it. And you should be moving on to something that's more actionable. Is that fair?
Oh, it totally is. In fact, you could flip this around the other way. You could say, hey, listen, who are the 10 clients that's been the longest since they've heard from me or met with me? Have their list, their names, Mike, like you said, their literal names. How can I deliver value to them this week? How can I be a better advisor to Bob and Sue this week?
I'm going to say action item number 2 is make a list of all of your models that you have. If it's not 5 or less, then you need to make a change, right? And say, great, how do you streamline these? We can have this debate, if you'd like to have it, about how the models are actually better for clients versus everyone having their own independent models.
Yes, yeah.
Not only the size and volume of it is an issue, but you're actually really hurting clients in the long run, potentially by having individual models. So, those standardized models are super, super important.
Massive compliance nightmare as well. And then when advisors say, hey, I don't have time to deliver value, right? I don't have time to do value adds, and they're playing around with 200 different models that really at the end of the day are all one sloppy model, but there's 200 variations of that. Micah, action item number 3, you know it, vote early, vote often. It is a presidential election year, so get that, stuff that ballot box full, 5 stars on whatever podcast platform you use. Of course, if you're a fan of our book, Delivering Massive Value, make sure to go on Amazon, give that 5 stars as well. It really helps spread the word, right? We're trying to transform the entire industry here and ultimately transform the client experience. So while it may seem like a small thing, those votes of confidence help.
Jarvis, as always, this podcast is about transforming lives. Thank you for spending the time with us in order to do it today. And until next time, happy planning.
Happy planning. Hey, before you leave, a quick word from our sponsors. Hey, everybody, I want you to take a quick look around your office, and on your desk, there should be the Retirement Tax Services Desktop Tax Guide. And if it's not there, or if it's not current, meaning you didn't download it in the last month, go to retirementtaxservices.com and download the Desktop Tax Guide. This is a must-have resource for every financial advisor committed to tax planning.
Hold on before we go. Something that you need to know. This isn't tax, legal, or investment advice. That isn't our intent. Information designed to change lives. Financial planning can make you thrive. Start today, don't think twice. Be a better husband, father, mother, and wife. The perfect RIA, the perfect